What's going on, guys? So recently, former Vice President Joe Biden said nobody needs weapons of war or assault weapons. Just buy a shotgun, step outside, fire two blasts in the air. We're not going to begin to get into the many levels of illegal and stupid that is in probably every state in the country, but let's talk about these propaganda terms: weapons of war and assault weapon. Weapons of war is supposed to refer to any weapon that was issued or anything that resembles any weapon issued to the military. Now, ironically, the first one that we're going to talk about actually led to diplomatic protest during World War One. The Germans actually issued a letter saying after capturing, I believe it was two different U.S. troops carrying them. The Germans actually issued a letter saying that any U.S. led military or U.S. led unit that was captured carrying this weapon or ammunition for this weapon would be executed on the spot. That weapon, of course, was actually the shotgun, specifically the Winchester Model 1897. And to this day, shotguns are widely considered one of the most destructive types of firearms. Now, that brings us to the first two of the weapons of war on our list that are in my personal collection. Meet the Remington 870 and the Mossberg 590A1. This particular one is an NRA edition, one of 500. And this is actually a Blackwater edition, which I have been unable to find out exactly how many of these were made before they were discontinued. So this is going to be the Remington 870. The Remington 870 was first announced by Remington in 1950 as a hunting shotgun for the civilian market. As military requirements for combat shotguns were recognized in the Vietnam War, the 870 was actually selected for acquisition by the Marine Corps in 1966, followed by other services in the 70s, including the Air Force Security Police. This is a 12 gauge, 6+1 capacity. The 870 has been used by the Marine Corps, the Air Force Special Operations Command, the Air Force Security Police, the Navy SEALs, law enforcement agencies, including U.S. Border Patrol, and was actually carried in the Lebanese Civil War, the Vietnam War, and the Iraq War. The Mossberg 590A1 here is actually a standard issue pump shotgun for most U.S. military as far as the few units that do actually carry them. It's also a 12 gauge pump shotgun with an 8+1 capacity. And this weapon was carried in the Gulf War, Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan. Now, this next weapon we're going to talk about is had actually been standard issue for the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Army since 1985. It's been the war and back carried in Operation Just Cause, the Persian Gulf War, the Somali Civil War, the Kosovo War, the Global War on Terrorism, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraq War. This weapon, of course, is the Beretta M9. This particular Beretta M9 is actually the 30th anniversary edition that we only made 2015 of. Yes, 2015, because they did it in 2015. They also did a decade version in 95 and a 20-year version in 05. The standard Beretta M9 can be picked up for somewhere around $700 or $800. Basic semi-automatic pistol with a 15+1 capacity. The next quote-unquote weapon of war on our list is actually used by various military units, law enforcement, and security agencies around the world. It's used by the U.S. Special Operations soldiers. It's used by MARSOC, which is Marine Corps Special Forces. And recently, Navy SEALs actually added it to their inventory. The weapon, of course, that I'm now talking about is the Glock 19. carried by some of the most elite special forces in the world, making this a weapon of war. This particular one is actually a Constitution model. But a standard Glock 19 on law enforcement discount cost me $400. They were going for $550 normally. I believe with Biden inflation, they're going for $6 and change at this point. But this is just a basic semi-automatic pistol with a 15+1 capacity as well. And one of the most popular handguns on the civilian market in America. Now, the next weapon of war that's on our list that's in my personal collection was actually designed for entry into the XM9 trials held by the U.S. Army in 1984 on behalf of the U.S. Armed Forces in general. It became standard issue for the Navy SEALs in 1962, and I believe is still carried by some of the most elite military operations units in the world, and was actually carried into battle in Panama, Somalia, Haiti, the Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, making this weapon the Sig Sauer P226 Mark 25, a weapon of war. This particular one is actually the Navy SEAL 50th Anniversary Edition. But you can pick up a regular P226 pretty much anywhere for $800 and change last I checked, and a Mark 25 for about $1,100, give or take. This is also a semi-automatic pistol with a 15+1 capacity. Now that we got through those, we're going to put the 9mm away and get into something with some real stopping power. The next weapon on our list, and the second last of our assault weapons countdown, has actually been carried all over the world for over a century. World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, standard issue for about 75 years, and though not still standard issue today, is still used and preferred by some military units today. Sergeant Alvin York, actually the highest ranking survivor in a particular battle, used his weapon to single-handedly kill 6 German soldiers, charging them with fixed bayonets, which he then pointed at the German commander and demanded and received their surrender, taking 132 German soldiers. This is also going to be the only gun on our list that's actually credited with taking down a fighter jet from World War I. Correction, World War II. One of our pilots attempting to take out a bridge in Burma in World War II ended up having to bail out in the skies over the bridge. He decided to play dead in his rig because at the time it was pretty common for the enemy pilots to actually shoot surviving pilots that were parachuting. The Japanese pilot approached him in his parachute, pitching the Zero's nose up to near stall speed, and actually opened his canopy to look at the American. The pilot, who was sneakily holding his M1911 45 ACP behind his back, snapped up and fired 4 rounds into the cockpit. The plane spun to the ground, and the pilot was found with a shot to the head near the plane. The M1911, which this is actually the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier edition, 1 of 500. This is a 45 ACP with an 8+1 capacity. But you can pick one of these up for maybe $400 for a regular non-limited edition version. Definitely a weapon of war. And just as an honorable mention, because I happen to have one here, standard issue sometime before the 1911 for the military, single action revolver. This is in 1858. But It's issued to the military. It's a weapon of war. Now let's talk about another very common weapon found here in America for self-defense. That's actually not a weapon of war, and that of course is this one right here, the AR-15. Armalite Rifle Model 15. Now of course the original design for this weapon was supposed to be able to fire 30 rounds in 6 seconds. Of course that means if you're someone that's highly trained on your trigger and can reload very fast, and you can crank out somewhere around 300 rounds per minute. Now this weapon is conflated constantly with the M16, which this is a replica of. The M16 was the actual military issue weapon, which was full auto, and by holding the trigger down could fire 800 rounds per minute, which was still child's play compared to one of HK's full automatic weapons that was capable of 2100 rounds per minute. Of course, we know that assault weapon or assault rifle are propaganda terms because they were originally used by Hitler. And Hitler was the first coined this term when he unveiled the Sturmgewehr 44, or Storm Rifle Model 44, as a new premier assault rifle of the German army. It's been a propaganda term ever since. The M16, which again this is a replica, if you wanted to get a legitimate one, you could. If you wanted to go through all the federal paperwork, which is 3 sets of paper have to be filled out, all of which include the fingerprint cards and passport photos, 2 copies sent to the ATF, 1 copy sent to the chief law enforcement officer in your county. It takes between 8 and 15 months for the approval. Not to mention the weapon itself, for something literally this plain, if it was this weapon but full automatic, completely plain, $20,000 to $30,000 you would have to spend in order to get that. And then after you get the approval, it's extremely restricted. You can't take it across state lines without permission. You can't let anybody borrow it. There's a bunch of red tape around having an actual NFA weapon. They've been restricted since 1934 with the National Firearms Act, and they were made non-transferable in 1986 with the Gun Owners Protection Act, an ironic term as usual. So there you have it. We have now discussed 7 common weapons of war and one that's not. If any of this information was shocking or new to you, please get in a class, get some training, talk to somebody that actually knows what they're doing, and stop believing the propaganda. Till next time. See you later, guys.